Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to our channel at Grade Level Reading. On LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on X, follow us at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to share anything you learned from today's webinar, and we will be sure to repost. We encourage you to share any questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, welcome to everyone. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping with the webinar. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and our programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the GLR community. I also want to give special thanks to our Leo sustaining sponsors, who you can see on this screen here. Thank you for your support as you make these Learning Tuesdays possible every single week. Thank you. And as we get started, I just have a few housekeeping details to share with you. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please share your name, city, and organization in the chat box. Be sure to select everyone so that we all know who is here and can see each other's chat messages. And feel free to share your thoughts and insights throughout the duration of the webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by using both the chat box and the Q&A box. We encourage you to post any questions you have in that Q&A box, as our panelists will be typing out responses and will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond to those. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as all slides, bios, and every resource will be emailed on Friday to all who registered. And lastly, we will be posting a brief on-screen poll during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. I also wanted to take a moment before we get started to turn your attention to some of our upcoming webinars that we have later this month and in February. Later this afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have an exciting conversation as part of our Big Bets series discussing the power of tutoring, and will feature some lessons and insights from local programs and practitioners. Next week on the 27th, we'll have another webinar in our Big Bets working series, again with a focus on tutoring, but with this discussion highlighting the Los Angeles settlement on lost learning during the pandemic. On February 3rd, we'll have another webinar in our Parents as Curator series, this time with a discussion on the federal education tax credit, digging in a little bit further into what states can do and the opportunities and challenges they might face. And on the 10th, part of our Technology Enhanced Teaching and Learning series with Designing for Connection, Powering Parents to Support Learning at Home and at School. All of those links to register will be posted in the chat box, and we hope that you will be able to make time and join us. And one last thing I wanted to highlight before we jump into our conversation, I just wanted to make sure you were aware that CGLR has launched our official Decoding NAEP report on our website. This report synthesizes the insights shared by 50 education thought leaders during our entire Decoding NAEP series. It examines the 2024 NAEP results and what they tell us about how to boost student achievement and close gaps. Again, a link to that will be posted in the chat box, but you can also scan that QR code that you see on the screen there. That will allow you to access the report. Once you read through, we would welcome any thoughts or engagement that you might have to offer, and we look forward to hearing from you. And joining you now to kick off the conversation is Sarah Torian with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Sierra. And welcome, everyone. I am so glad that you could all join us for the first Funder to Funder conversation of 2026. Since our founding, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has worked to ensure that parents are engaged as essential partners in their children's education. And so it seems fitting that we would kick off a new year of funder-focused conversations with a session that's focused on keeping families at the center. We know it's not always easy to build strong bridges between schools and families, given busy schedules, communication challenges, and often inflexible institutions and systems. But we do also know that it is critical if we want to ensure children's early school success. We know that because of some powerful new research that finds that schools with higher family engagement measures are beating the odds in terms of post-pandemic student achievement, as well as student attendance and student achievement. And we're going to get a chance to learn a little bit about that research, as well as several other studies that can help funders to both make the case for investments in families and family engagement, as well as understand effective strategies for doing so. And we'll engage in conversation with some philanthropic leaders who are working to strengthen connections between families and educators, hearing how they have invested in building the evidence base to support investments in families, how they are focused on changing practices of educators and schools rather than asking families to change their practices, and how they are leveraging family engagement to support early literacy. And to begin that conversation, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our panelists now. Welcome first to Eyal Bergman. Eyal is the strategic advisor at Learning Heroes, where he is leading the Family Engagement or FACE Impact Study, a multi-phase investigation that he will share insights and updates on today. Welcome also to Emily Garcia. Emily leads the Flamboyant Foundation's Washington, D.C. office, where she oversees the foundation's work to expand real family engagement, REAL, with partners locally in DC as well as across the country. Welcome also to Bib Hubbard. Bib is the founder and CEO of Learning Heroes, an organization designed and launched to help build the capacity of families and educators to team up as learning heroes on behalf of student achievement and school success. Also delighted to welcome Ambika Kapoor back to our Leo webinars. Ambika is a program director in education at the Carnegie Corporation of New York, where she oversees grant making focused on strengthening civic engagement or civic participation in education. She previously led Carnegie's grant making aimed at engaging parents, communities, educators, and policymakers in education improvements, and therefore brings a wealth of insights to today's conversation. Also happy to welcome Teralyn Little, the Youth Literacy Program Officer at Carmel Hill, to today's conversation. T brings more than 20 years of experience in education, youth development, and nonprofit leadership to bear in supporting literacy outcomes for youth across New York City. And finally, welcome to Emily Markovich Morris. Emily serves as a fellow in the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, where she leads the Family, School, and Community Engagement Initiative. A global education policy expert, Emily's research focuses on fostering partnerships among families, schools, and communities to support marginalized youth in achieving their learning, work, and life aspirations. And then to guide us through today's conversation, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Greg Baer. Greg is the executive director of the Grable Foundation, where he leads the foundation's efforts to engage families in their children's learning. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'm excited for today's conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Greg.
Sarah, many thanks to you and to everyone at the campaign for giving us this space today. We are so grateful. I love seeing you all join from across this country, from Tallahassee to Charleston, St. Louis to New Mexico, even overseas in Bologna. Happy Tuesday, everyone, wherever you are, whatever time of day it may be. I am joining you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where ideally the warmth of the sun is helping us navigate these incredibly freezing temperatures that we're experiencing here today. And if you're like me, I hope you have your Post-it notes ready, because we are in for a rich time together with some extraordinary human beings who've been doing some amazing work around family engagement. As Sarah mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Grable Foundation here in Pittsburgh, and we have the privilege of supporting the learning landscape in Western Pennsylvania, early childhood through grade 12 and beyond, in and out of school. And like all of you, I'm sure you struggle to figure out how best can we support parents, families, and caregivers as they engage with this learning landscape, among other things. And I want to share with you just 3 simple examples, complex projects to be sure, but 3 examples that for us have been sticky over the past decade in southwestern Pennsylvania, that maybe make concrete some of our grant making as it relates to family engagement. First is something called kidsburg.org, which is essentially a media platform, a media partnership currently involving our CBS television station as well as an online line weekly that is uplifting the stories, the ideas, the projects of things happening that are supportive of parents, families, and caregivers across southwestern Pennsylvania. It's become its own important media platform that's adding to the storytelling in a rich and important way for those who are caring for our children and youth in our corner of the world. The second example is something called Remake Learning Days. So in this region, there's a nearly 20-year-old learning network that's connecting in and out of school, early childhood through higher ed with all sorts of innovative learning practices and examples and experiences. And 10 years ago, the schools, the museums, the libraries, the early learning centers, and other sites of learning that are part of this network organized a regional festival such that for the same days every May, these organizations host family-friendly events designed to get parents and caregivers into STEAM labs and into digital learning spaces and all sorts of places where learning is being remade to help parents understand how learning is being remade, to understand if their kid is led up by art and design or coding or other things that are maybe new to us or certainly different from our own experiences, how to see the region as a learning landscape to support their children's passion and interest. And then maybe most importantly, to build parent demand for innovative practices in their kids' learning lives. And then a third example, something called Parents as Allies. It's in some ways, it's a professional development, a professional learning project that's connecting school teams consisting of administrators and teachers who are working together to find ways to enhance and improve family school engagement in that school setting that go far beyond parent teacher conferences and school communications, as hard as it is to do those two things well. I mean, doing those two things well might earn you a Nobel Peace Prize of some sort. And these organizations and schools and people involved have come up with hundreds of little bets, little hacks of things they're doing to build trust in their communities. So these are three examples of things that we've done. I'm sure you're thinking about some of your own funding experiences as we commonly endeavor to support parents, families, and caregivers in the lives of our young people. And so we want to use those examples to dig right into some research and what it is that we're learning about parents and about family engagement. And so I want to invite into the conversation Eyal and Emily. We are so lucky to have you both here. When I think about people around this country who are at the forefront of remarkable research and learning, I think immediately of the two of you. So I've got my post-it notes ready, and I've asked both of you a completely unfair task, and that is to give us your elevator pitch of comprehensive, complex research findings in the course of the extraordinary work that you've done. So, Eyal, I want to turn to you first. If you could share with us some of your findings from the important work that you've been doing around family engagement and the impact of that study.
Well, thank you, Greg. It's really great to be with you. Thank you for those kind words. And thank you also to the campaign for hosting this important conversation and for welcoming us into this space. I'll start by just taking a step back and sharing a little bit about where this study comes from and how it came to be. It's the Family Engagement Impact Study, and it was born out of a hypothesis that when schools shuttered in March of 2020, and school was going to have to take place in the home, that the schools that had stronger partnerships with families already were just going to be better equipped to withstand the disruptions. And I think many of us had that hypothesis, but fast forward a couple of years to the spring of 2022, and I was on a webinar with Karen Mapp. Many people here will know who that is, a really preeminent leader in the field of family engagement, a mentor to me and to many of us in the field. And she was saying that she was hearing from a lot of superintendents and a lot of district leaders that the schools that had stronger engagement were just doing a little bit better, and that this would be a really important time to study the impact of engagement. And so that a funder came forward and said that that would be of interest. And so the first thing we did was build a team. So we brought on TNTP as our research partner. Karen Mapp and Todd Rogers at Harvard served as our advisors. And the second thing we tried to do was to try to identify the right data source to tackle this hard question. And we quickly came to the 5 essentials in Illinois, which is a statewide survey that's administered in nearly every school in Illinois. It has been for over 10 years. It's administered by the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research, so it's validated, it's rigorous, and it's one of the only data sets that has a family engagement construct. So it allows for these large scale analyses. And so in the first stage of the study, what we did was we just found a really remarkable connection between schools' pre-pandemic family engagement scores and their immediate post-pandemic outcomes, especially on attendance and chronic absence. And then in stage 2, which was a qualitative follow-up, we really were trying to understand what are some of these bright spot schools that are really crushing it, that are doing really well, much better than expected? Like, what is happening there? What are the policies? What are the practices? What are the mindsets that are setting them apart? And that is actually data that we'll be releasing a little bit later in March, but I'm happy to provide a little sneak preview to that in a little bit. And then stage 3 of the study, which rounds out the study, which we're currently fundraising for, may end up, I think, being the most impactful stage, because what we're aiming to do is improve measurement of family engagement. And I think any family engagement leader will tell you that that's a big need, because while 5 essentials or other survey instruments, they can tell you what your score is, they don't necessarily tell you how to get better at that score or which engagement practices you should be measuring. And we know from improvement science that it's hard to get better at something unless you're really able to measure it. And schools are trying things in all kinds of ways all over the country, but their efforts may not always necessarily be aligned to what the evidence says. So getting parents to show up to events may be really good, but it may not necessarily drive improved attendance or learning outcomes. So this is the final stage that we're hoping to round out in order to create a measurement tool that will really help schools improve their engagement efforts. So that's the step back on the whole study as a whole.
Eyal, thank you for that overview. And I'm going to turn back to you in a moment to address some of the central findings.
Sure.
Emily, let me bring you into the conversation, because you and your colleagues at Brookings have done some extraordinary research. Can you give us that elevator pitch overview, please?
Thank you, Greg, and thanks to the campaign and for all of you for joining. At the Center for Universal Education, we, since 2019, have been really leaning in globally to how do we study and how do we build evidence and build partnerships in family, school, and community engagement. We do that through our Family Engagement and Education Network that works across 6 continents. And we've been really looking at how critical family engagement is to education systems transformation, and what do we need to study to really help schools thrive, to help students' learning outcomes, and to help create conditions for students and for schools to thrive. So in 2024, we started a 6-continent, 16-country study where we worked with over 25,000 families, students, and educators to really lean into family, school, community engagement and really measure and findings and compare findings from across the different continents. And we call this the 6 global lessons on family engagement. And some of the remarkable findings that we found across the world was, 1, how important it is to really understand different beliefs on education. We found that educators, families, and students had very different beliefs on education and teaching and learning and how to partner and work together. And it was really critical to really talk about these beliefs and start there to building a shared vision of education in schools. We also found that families were a critical and an untapped potential for helping build school partnerships and outcomes, and that one of the factors that was getting in the way of really leaning into this potential was a blame game. And we found this across all of the different countries countries, including our schools and our partners across the United States, and that educators often saw that families were not getting engaged in the ways that schools envisioned that they should be engaged, and families were struggling in many ways to get engaged because of different systemic challenges, being overwhelmed, and often not knowing how to support their children's learning and get engaged. And so breaking these blame games and really leaning in and working together and having these conversations was so vital to building partnerships. And we found, and we're continuing to study how, when we have these conversations and we build strategies and a shared vision together, that can really shift critical issues in schools, from school climate, chronic absenteeism, to student outcomes. How do we do that together in partnerships? And how do we study that and build the evidence base of how do we take a small change and continue to work together in partnership to do so? And we're also looking now in AI and education and technology. And as the education environment and ecosystem is changing, how do we continue to bring families in and center them in education transformation?
And Emily, you just said AI. So in this AI era, and knowing that Brookings, you just released a report last week, can you just say a word or two about that new report on AI and education?
Yes, last week we released the report, A New Direction for Students in an AI World, Prosper, Prepare, and Protect. And this report, led by my colleague Rebecca Winthrop and others, studies really from the perspective of families and educators and students, AI and the risks and the benefits of AI in education around the world. And one of the key findings is that the risks of AI at the moment are overshadowing the benefits, but the benefits and the potential for elevating the benefits are there, particularly if we build partnerships with families and schools. And one of the other key findings that came out of this research is that AI has the potential to degrade trust or build trust, and that families were often finding that at home they were left to understand AI and to monitor AI and to navigate AI with their children, and they often felt they didn't have the resources and the knowledge how to do that, and that impacted the relationships with schools. And so in building policies on AI, it is really critical from the findings to work with families on that and work with young people and to come to common understanding. And so we've released also in the last few days tips for families, for family-facing tips on how do they understand what AI is, what is the research, and how do they really have these conversations in the home to really protect their children, but also to make sure that AI is benefiting learning and allowing children to continue their learning without offloading skills. And families are such a critical piece of that.
Yeah, you can imagine there are 100 directions I want to go. I hope everyone has 10 or maybe 100 tabs open because they're clicking on the links in the chat. Al, returning to the impact study, can you share with us some of the impact findings, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key takeaway is that all schools faced worse outcomes coming out of the pandemic, but strong engagement scores pre-pandemic were just associated with much better outcomes. So how to read this slide. So a school with quote unquote weak engagement is one that we identified as one is in the 10th percentile of the family engagement score on that 5 essentials survey. A school with strong engagement is one that we qualify in the 90th percentile of engagement. And what we did in the analysis is that we compared engagement scores in 2019, which is the last full year of data before the pandemic, to outcomes in 2022, which is the first full year that we had data in and after the pandemic. And we controlled in our statistical model for nearly 24 factors, including poverty, race, the other 4 essentials, prior achievement, community type, so you're not comparing rural to urban communities, school type, so you're not comparing elementary to high schools. It was a very robust model that our research partners at TNTP developed, and we see the results. So if you look to the right on ELA and math proficiency rates, everyone's score went down, so to the left, but schools with strong engagement just saw smaller decreases when we controlled for all the factors in our model. And especially on chronic absence, when you control for all the factors in the model, weak engagement schools increased by about 16 percentage points, and strong engagement schools increased by just under 10 percentage points. So that's a 6.2 percentage point difference in chronic absence. Let's go back just for a second. In a school of 500, just to give a practical sense of what this means, right? In a school of 500 kids, that's 31 children. In a school of 1,000 kids, that's 62 children. That's multiple classrooms of kids. That's a whole grade level. And I'm pretty sure that most schools in America would love to reduce their chronic absence rates by 6.2 percentage points.
Yeah.
Those are some of the most important findings. But to me, the most jaw-dropping is on the next slide. This is really what blew us away. So it can be a little hard to read, so I'm going to try to explain this. When you control for all the factors in the model and you compare a school in the 10th to the 90th percentile on the family engagement score, the estimated difference is a decrease in 6.2 percentage points on chronic absence. That's what we just saw. When you also control for the factors and you compare a school in the 10th to the 90th percentile on poverty rate, that's the second one, the estimated difference is an increase in 5.7 percentage points on chronic absence. In other words, the family engagement score actually showed a stronger relationship with chronic absence than poverty rates, which to me is like, in this world of so much disheartening news, this is a fundamentally good news story that we can do a lot to counteract many of the effects of poverty in community if we invest in building strong relationships with families. And it also shows that schools, regardless of where you are in the socioeconomic ladder, you can really develop stronger engagement strategies that make a difference on chronic absence.
And Eyal, can you say a word or two about what's forthcoming in stage 2?
Sure. So I won't go into a whole lot of the methodology, but I will say, so this is like a little sneak peek. We're excited to be sharing this little sneak peek, and we're going to be releasing our full report in early March. And I won't get into a ton of the methodology now, but what I'll say is that it was very rigorous. We did not just go to schools with strong 5 essential scores. We determined which schools were way outperforming expectations relative to their peers. And we went to schools that were bright spot schools along with partner schools in their same communities, in their same districts, with nearly identical student populations. And then we did over 100 interviews of principals, teachers, and parents. And these are some of the key factors that emerged. So mindsets, leadership, communication patterns, and relationships. And much of this replicates what we have known from the evidence and what people who work in schools have known before. But there are some new wrinkles. So just on the mindsets, we saw that again and again at Bright Spots, staff and families emphasize this shared belief that educators and families are on the same team. The word team comes up over and over again, equal partners, despite any possible barriers. And really interestingly, when we asked about barriers in our interviews, the partner schools actually talked more about the barriers than the Bright Spot schools did. And the Bright Spot schools were just like, are there barriers or excuses?
So Eyal, looking at these factors that distinguish bright spots, Emily, it makes me want to turn to you because I know in your research, you elevate ideas that are consistent with what we're seeing on this slide in terms of child well-being, relational trust, school climate, cohesion. Can you talk a little bit more about the Brookings research and your own findings and the ways in which it might resonate or take us in some additional directions?
Yeah, and I think that our research with what else is sharing, really, they go hand in hand. And if you lean into sort of the relationships piece and the communication piece and the mindset piece, we're also finding that with our work on really measuring relational trust in schools. And so one of the big things that we have been doing is creating a scale and creating conditions to really understand relational trust, and doing this with the schools across the world. And we've found that trust is really, it is the beliefs, as Eyal was speaking to, it's the mindsets and the beliefs and the attitudes, but it's also the decisions and whether or not families and educators are partnering and moving that into action. So we've been studying, how do you understand the beliefs, talk about the beliefs, but also move to greater action and greater relational trust. And we found through our Southwest Pennsylvania work also, this has to really happen at the speed of trust. And so that finding of it takes time to move through these beliefs to decisions to actions, but when we do, it helps create conditions and policies and outcomes that benefit the schools and the students. So our relational trust scale that we have been building out has 7 elements to this scale, and it builds on foundational research on trust that has existed, to Eyal's point. And if you'll see at the middle of this, the shared vision, this idea of having common beliefs and a common vision going forward. We might have different perspectives, but how do we build that vision? The good news is that we have found across all of the 16 countries that actually families have greater trust with educators than educators often think. But we did find that educators, it didn't always go the other way, that educators often had lower levels of trust with families. And so we've been looking at, how do we actually lean in and measure that and build trust? And we found that care of families and educators was quite high across schools, but the sticking point was often integrity and following through promises and words. And for example, with AI and education, the integrity of use and monitoring in AI has created conditions of distrust. And so how do we lean into that and really have these conversations and create a culture of listening? We also found that there was different cultures of listening across schools, and those schools, to Eyal's point, that really create this two-way conversation and that really allow families to be heard, were able to build this vision and build this trust. And if they had this trust, it was a critical connection and outcome to student outcomes and to conditions that help build school climate.
Emily and Eyal, we could spend this entire time with you. Happily, we're going to bring you back into a Q&A conversation. I have questions for you. I hope everyone that's listening will add to the Q&A with their own questions. I want to, at this moment, bring in Bib. Bib, you have many superpowers at Learning Heroes. One of those superpowers is you make sense of things, right? I mean, this is complex and complicated research that Eyal and Emily have conveyed in a remarkable plain spokenness here in just 20 minutes. Can you help us make sense of it, how you think about it, how your colleagues think about it, how you're seeing funders think about these types of research findings?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, to the campaign for having me and us for this important conversation. All of our research at Learning Heroes is actionable. So as I dig into what we heard from Emily and Eyal, which is so compelling, I also want to point to a report we just released called Centering Families in the Future of Education. So as we think beyond, we also need to look back. So we have, 10 years worth of insights where we have specific examples of where data has actually been translated into action. So encourage folks to check that out to get some really concrete ways that you can take data and then apply that to your local context. But specifically, Emily and Eyal just gave us, such important insights into why this work matters. And their data sits on decades of other empirical data. So we now have an emerging roadmap for what practitioners and policymakers and other actors, funders can do in this space. So specifically, what kind of comes to mind, that especially from the funder community, like how do we take this, how do we make sense of this data and do something about it, is to invest in those bold leaders. You heard from both Emily and Eyal the consistency around having that belief, that mindset, the ability to build relational trust, which is really challenging to do and takes a lot of intentionality. So finding and investing in those bold leaders who have those beliefs, who can build the mindset, build the strategies, I think is critically important to spread what we're learning and what we're seeing in terms of these incredible results. Training teachers, I think, is another place where the field can look to lift what we're learning from, the evidence that is across the globe. You heard Emily say, parents trust their teachers, but a lot of times teachers don't share that trust backwards. And so I think that's really a critical, important point. And teachers want to trust parents. When we survey them, they know that families matter, but the how is so tricky. So giving teachers the strategies, the tools, the training, the time to be able to engage with families, I think is a really essential, action that can come out of this. And I would also say investing in families, right? Giving them a seat at the table, making sure that their needs are heard and valued and honored. And then importantly, I think finally funders have a unique opportunity to fund more research. Eyal talked about our next wave of research that we're hoping to execute, but there are so many other ways that we can continue to build this evidence base, the work that Brookings is doing and others, to shine a light on those different ways that different local contexts can put this research into action.
Bib, you're lucky to be a parent. I'm lucky to be a parent. As parents, it just feels like there's so much shifting underneath our feet, to say nothing of like politics and the socioeconomic conditions. There are sort of the everyday realities of things like attendance and cell phones and the use of these digital devices in schools and career pathways and prospects for our kids. And so when you say giving parents, families, and caregivers a seat at the table, like what does that look like? How might we think about engaging parents and families, particularly as funders, in ways that are smart and helpful, and ultimately helpful to the parents?
Yeah, I think, and I would add, Emily just talked about AI. Let's add AI into that basket. We saw from the Center for Democracy and Technology, they just did a survey in December. 45% of parents in the US never use AI, like never use AI. Like that's shocking to me. And that's from December. We like students were also polled, and students whose schools use AI feel more disconnected to their teachers. So there are all the things that you just said that families are having to grapple with. So parents have, and not to mention ESAs, the new tax credit. There are just a multitude of things that are being thrown at parents. Accountability is more with parents than it has ever been before. So parents have more choice, you could say more voice, but they still lack the information that they deserve to make informed decisions on behalf of their children. So I think it's really vital for funders to acknowledge that the 9 out of 10 parents that we've been screaming from the rooftops, regardless of race, income, or education level, who think their children are both, reading and doing math on grade level and have high aspirations for college going. So that's also what we're hearing from parents now. We just polled parents in New York City, thanks to Carmel Hill's funding in part. They want them to go to college or get a post-secondary experience, and workforce is at the bottom of the list. Super interesting time that we're in. So I think funders, as we are redesigning education, and we have all these opportunities with AI and different policies, making sure parents are centered in those conversations as co-designers. So investing in, again, these bold leaders who are bringing parents in. The work of Parents as Allies is such a great example, Greg. Like you're listening to those local families, what matters most to them, what are their hopes and dreams for their children, what are those pathways, and making sure parents are armed with the information that's accurate, timely, understandable, so they can make the best decisions. We have new opportunities through technology to do this, but the system is still designed to kind of keep parents and teachers apart. So I think we have to like not listen to the noise, but focus on what's in front of us and what parents care most about, which is their children's academics, their children's life skills, and setting them up for success. But this is a moment of unprecedented opportunity.
Bib, how lucky are we to have you and learning heroes in the world? And we're going to bring you back into the conversation a bit. I can already see some fantastic questions in the Q&A. Keep them coming, please. Open those tabs in the chat. I want to draw in three of my peers. And so I want to invite Ambika and T and Emily into the conversation. Hello to the three of you. And Ambika, I'll turn to you first because you and your colleagues at the Carnegie Corporation over the past decades plus, right, have invested so much in parent-family engagement. You've learned so much. You've published about this work and the work that your grantees have accomplished across this country. Can you give us some of those highlights of things learned?
Sure. Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you to the campaign for grade level reading for asking me to join you. And hello, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. So at Carnegie, we've been investing, as Greg said, for a long time, but we've also in family engagement, but we all know, and all we heard about today too from so far, that family engagement has been recognized for decades as a powerful driver for student success. A strong body of research consistently shows improved academic outcomes, stronger social, emotional development. And it also what we've heard from Eyal and some of the studies that and even Brookings, that it's family engagement is not sort of a supplemental activity. It's a core component of effective education. So Carnegie's work was really built on this deep, credible research base. I think the enduring challenge has never been whether family engagement matters, but how it's defined, how it's supported and sustained, especially at scale, and in the ways that families can be centered as partners. And I think that's what we come down to every time, even what Bib sort of said. So that's really been sort of our interest, and it got us involved in family engagements as an important priority in education. So moving on, I did put two slides and not totally necessary, but I'll move on to the next slide. When Carnegie first entered this space in 2016, the question we were asking was a strategic one, like how could philanthropy play a catalyzing role in strengthening the connection between families and schools, and rather than duplicating all the work that's already been done. So to ground this inquiry, we partnered with EY Parthenon to do a family engagement landscape analysis. And what we learned was that the field, there was significant activity and commitment from funders, but there was real fragmentation. And I think there was no shared definition of what effective family engagement looked like. There was limited infrastructure for shared learning and few opportunities to translate promising practices into scalable approaches. So in response, Carnegie launched what we called our public understanding portfolio, but that's really how we sort of defined stakeholder engagement or family engagement. And we had three complementary sort of areas that we invested in: strengthening home to school connection, building parent leadership and capacity, and advancing field knowledge and tools. And across these areas, we supported grantees working directly with schools, community-based organizations, and we cultivated parent leadership and voice. So what we've learned, so by 2021, we actually had CPRL, that's the Center for Public Research and Leadership, do a retrospective or an assessment of the field, because we had sort of done this in 2016, and then we were like, let's see by 2021, with all these investments, did we learn anything? And I think what we saw that there's an emergence of a shared agenda. I actually don't even need to tell you that. This conversation today shows that there's a shared agenda around family engagement. There are a lot more people recognizing family engagement as central to student outcomes. There's also a more stronger and more diverse knowledge base. And importantly, the field has expanded beyond traditional education actors to include community-based organizations and funders committed to equity and shared leadership. We also saw shifts in funding models away from viewing families as beneficiaries and towards inviting families and communities into leadership roles. So that was also another learning. And we saw stronger field infrastructure taking shape. The fact that we have the campaign for grade level reading and all of you on this call, very different from when we started investing in this space. So I'd say Carnegie's role was not around a single intervention and more helping move the field from proof to practice and then to infrastructure. And I think that helped normalize family voice as an essential part of education system. Our work is not done, that's for sure. But that sort of evolution has, I think, raised a question for all of us. How do we deepen family power, not just engagement, especially in decision-making and policy? I think, Babe, you said it really well. How do we see sort of partners at the table, and how do we have them, no matter what policies we make, how do we see partners as, how do we see families as essential partners? I do want to say one quick thing that Carnegie, which you might have heard from others too, we are, even though we invested heavily in family engagement for several years, our strategy has now evolved. We are not directly investing in family engagement, but where we are today is building on what we've learned. We are now supporting young people and students more directly, helping them become more civically engaged and supporting them in their journey through economic and social mobility. But these lessons truly, these investments truly draw on the lessons of family engagement by meeting students and families where they're at. So I'd say for us, it's not that we have moved away entirely. We're now focused really on sort of different priorities, meaning civic engagement and economic mobility, but we see families as essential to that process too. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Greg.
Ambika, thank you. So many of us are grateful for what you've done and continue to do. I know we've benefited at the Grable Foundation, and I suspect that that's true too for my colleagues at the Flamboyant and Carmel Hill Foundations. And so I want to bring T and Emily into this conversation. Emily, I began this conversation by sharing some examples of things that we've done here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. Can you share a little bit about where and how you've invested in family engagement and why for you as a funder it's important to figure out how to do so?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Greg. At Flamboyant, we had the privilege to partner with Carnegie on some family engagement investments years ago, and thank you to the entire campaign for having this conversation. At Flamboyant, we see our role as we straddle both the philanthropic space and the programmatic space to help schools and systems design sustainable solutions that position families as true partners in their child's learning. And for us, that starts from an equity-driven premise, which is that families are not a problem to be solved, but rather they are an all too often untapped asset that we need to help educators and systems learn how to partner with. And so that belief shapes our funding approach. We believe that all families play 5 critical roles in their child's education. They communicate high expectations, they monitor their child's performance, they support learning at home, they advocate for their child, and they guide their child's education. And research tells us that families with more information and better access to resources are better able to play that role. And so for us, that means that a big pillar of our funding is that we don't invest solely in family-facing solutions, because that is only addressing half of the challenge. And so we believe that sustainable change requires shift in educator practice, mindset, and system design. And so in practice, that shows up in 2 ways. First, we invest nationally in evidence-based solutions like parent-teacher home visits. Eyal talked about relational trust. Emily talked about relational trust. And time again, a relationship-based home visit is the gold standard for beginning that partnership between educator and family. And so we provide funding opportunities to help catalyze or sustain these practices in systems across the country. It also means investing locally in our DC ecosystem. And that is where we really see this combination of our philanthropic work and our programmatic support to build long-term capacity inside schools and the system itself. And so that can be systems level funding to help catalyze new initiatives like the adoption of the Family School Panorama Survey across all DC public and DC public charter schools here in the city. It can be school-based funding to help expand listening opportunities so that schools really understand what the barriers are so we can begin to remove them for families. And it means our programmatic support, which we see as an investment of providing coaches who work with schools to implement long-term changes to their family engagement practice. So when we determine what to invest in, we look primarily about how are we investing in educator capacity. And so Bib brought up, how are we training teachers? How are we building capacity? And so for us, that is number one thing. What are we looking at? How are we ensuring that our investments lead to teachers and leaders having the skills and support to build relationships, communicate consistently, and partner academically with families? And sometimes that also means investing in the infrastructure that gets overlooked, but is essential for sustainability. That's things like expanding access to two-way communication systems or data tools to help track more than just attendance at events, but rather track the long-term engagement and follow-through from that initial conversation to the academic partnering to the ongoing communication that is that glue that holds these relationships together. And so in all of our funding opportunities, we are always asking ourselves the question of, is this investment sustainable? Sustainability doesn't always mean length of time, but it does mean making sure that when we invest funds, we are ensuring systemic solutions, not one-off interventions to make sure that we're changing how systems and how educators see families and how families experience the school system.
Can you just repeat that and give it a little more color, Emily? Because you're not asking parents and families to do something different. You're
We are
asking the
not.
systems to behave differently to engage those parents and families.
Yeah, I mean, you summed it up for me, but I can certainly share a little bit more. I think one of the things that we have found is there are lots of places that want to invest or want to see families do something different. And we heard what Emily said. Emily said when they talk to families, families trust educators, but that's often more than educators trust families. And so if we are not creating the conditions for educators to challenge their mindsets, to actually learn what does it mean to effectively engage families. One of the things we often say here at Flamboyant is families are experts in their child. And as an educator, you are an expert in content and pedagogy. And so how you support the child is going to be different than how the parent or family supports the child. Your job is to create that space. And for us, the most powerful family engagement investments are those that help change how systems are seeing families, how educators are practicing this partnership, and how leadership is defining success. I mean, I think part of this is also changing our own minds that sometimes quantity is not more important than quality. And so shifting that from a funding perspective is super important. And we do find that when those conditions are in place, families do what they've always done. They show up for their kids, and the system finally is able to meet them in a way that acknowledges the wealth of expertise that they bring to the conversation.
T, you do some incredible work at Carmel Hill. And so can you tell us a little bit about the how and why for you as you think about family engagements, please?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I just want to kind of check plus everything that Emily said. She could have answered this question for both of us because there's a lot of alignment and resonance in what she shared. But to share a little bit about kind of Carmel Hill, starting with our why, our investments in family engagement are really driven by a few things. I think one is just a strong belief that learning doesn't just happen in the classroom. From a time the child wakes up until a young person goes to sleep, they are learning through every interaction, every environment, and every space that they touch. And when those people who kind of people a child's life, again, throughout their day, throughout their experience, are equipped with the tools and the space, we can really support our young people in thriving. And so one of those drivers is yes, learning happens in the classroom, but it happens at every point of a young person's life. And we really need to look to the other spaces, their families, their community members, their chosen families, because family looks different for every child. And do they have the space, the tools, the resource, the trust, all the things that we've been talking about already to really support their young person in thriving? We believe that every person in a child's life has their own role and their own superpower. And when we acknowledge that, we can really bring that to life. Another thing that drives it is that different environments provide unique opportunities for learning. So I don't see kind of the homeschool connection as just a way to support what's happening in the classroom. There's power to the learning that happens at home that has its own unique magic. There's power to what happens in the community that has its own unique magic. And we hold homeschool and community up as equal learning spaces that also empowers that magic to come to life and fully wrap that young person in that holistic support. And so how do we really hold those environments up as equal learning environments for a young person, and not kind of one directional towards what's happening in the schoolhouse? Really make it a two-directional relationship. Another thing that I think drives our investment is just a recognition that high-level family engagement, the type that we're talking about, requires time, space, resources, and capacity building. Like Emily said, it requires that infrastructure. We can't just toss best practices at people. It's not going to work. So if we're not putting resources behind that time, that space, that capacity building, then it's not going to reach its full potential. So that's a little bit about our why. Again, check plussing a lot of what Emily shared. And what that has looked like for us is both investment at systems and community level. We support research, capacity building, and direct programming around family engagement. Like Viv said, we have the pleasure of partnering with Learning Heroes on a new set of research focusing on literacy and math here in New York City. We provide funding directly. We partner with New York City Public Schools. And so the Office of Family and Community Engagement has a wonderful program called Family Ambassadors, which is really about lifting up and empowering those parents and those family members as leaders in their own community. And so it's kind of a train the trainer model where we're supporting them in understanding science of reading, understanding literacy, and then they are going out and really taking the reins because they're the trusted voices, the trusted advisors in their community. And so it's really, again, they have their relationships. They know what other families need, what other parents need. And so they are then building that capacity to go out and be the leaders in their own community. And so some of that investment happens at the school level. And then we also support nonprofits and cultural institutions that are supporting things like parent power, knowledge and skill building, ensuring that there are resources at home, like home libraries and tools that parents can actually use at home with their children, curating spaces for caregivers to actually practice and learn alongside their child. And many of these orgs are grounded in the community and they're going where the families are, which is something else we know has come out of the research, is that we have to go where families are. And so these are organizations that are partnering with our pediatricians in our clinic offices. They are doing home visits, like Emily said, and going into the home and supporting families there through local businesses, through our libraries. And so they're really going where families are and ensuring that those experiences, those resources are there. And to kind of shout out some of our wonderful partners, we have our Reach Out and Read, who again is partnering with local clinics and pediatricians to bring the importance of early literacy and that early relational health into those well visits where families are. We have our Parent Child Plus, who is a leader in kind of a home visit model and where they're bringing again those early literacy and early attachment strategies into the home, and creating that space for that parent and that child to have that experience together while modeling what those high quality practices look like. And in organizations like Link, who are kind of leading really the charge in early literacy and family engagement here in New York City, who bring those experiences into the community. One new area that I want to highlight before I wrap up here that has emerged, which Emily began to touch on, was how we are supporting our teachers, and building capacity for our teachers, because some of these are direct to family models. And so Link, one of our partners, came to us and said, hey, we really feel like we are well positioned right now, given that we have deep expertise in grounding in family engagement, to really support our schools and our teachers with making sense of their data and linking that with some of the best practices that we know are tried and true. And they approached us with this opportunity and we said, okay, let's talk about how we can make this work. And so right now we're supporting a pilot with Link, where they are actually supporting early childhood teachers with taking their Acadience data, figuring out how do you make this make sense for a parent, for a caregiver, for a family member, and then how do you link that directly to best practices that they can do at home. And they felt like we have the capacity, we have the expertise, we want to do more than just our community workshops. We want to support schools directly, and we had the opportunity as a funder to provide the resources that they needed. And so we have an opportunity to learn how that partnership between a community organization who has that deep family engagement expertise, what does it look like when they step in as a capacity builder for teachers and school leaders who are looking for that support?
T, I want to invite everyone, all of our presenters so far, to turn on their cameras. We're going to engage in conversation, but I want to ask the first question to T and Emily in particular. Apart from turning to the campaign or to Learning Heroes or Brookings, T and Emily, how are you keeping up to date about the things about which you ought to be thinking as you think about your really important strategies around family engagement?
T, do you want to start or you want me to start?
Sure, I can start here. Aside from the things that you just named, Greg, I would say we turn to families. We turn to families. I think it's really important and crucial for any funder to find what your way is to get on the ground and really dive in with families. And so for us, that has looked like listening sessions with our community-based partners who are the trusted voice with families in the community. Showing up as a member of the community yourself where possible. I myself am a parent of a school-age child. Go to your local community education council, go to your school board meeting, actually be in spaces where families are. Just like we say, the strategy is go where families are. I think as a funder, you also have to go where families are. So how are you really getting yourself out there? I'm a parent. I have parent friends. I am, as a literacy program officer, absolutely asking my friends, how are you experiencing NYC Reads Night right now? How is that going for you? What are you seeing in your child's classroom? So I'm taking advantage of my network, but I'm also an active member of this community, and I'm getting out there where the parents are to hear their voices. Tap into the local parent advocacy groups in your neighborhood. Get some time with them. They will tell you what they think. Okay, advocates want to tell you what they think. So tap into your local parent and family advocate groups. But we have to find a way to bring an authentic family and parent voice into our practices, into our policy, and into our funding. Because I think if we don't, we run the risk of continuing kind of harmful pattern of treating families as those passive receivers and not as active partners. And family engagement can become paternalistic in nature. And I think if funders, if we are not getting on the ground and really listening, because there is a power that we have as funders, can run the risk of kind of powering those kind of harmful trends in the past that we are working very hard to move away from, because the research has showed that that's not what works when it comes to supporting our families and our parents.
And Emily?
I'm going to double tap everything that T just said. I think at Flamboyant, we often say that the people closest to the problem hold the solution. And I think that means that we have to be in community with educators, families, and systems, and take a learning stance when we're in community with them. I think oftentimes as funders, we take a funder stance, but we don't always take a learning stance when we are in these conversations. And so recognizing those power dynamics and shifting our own hat that we're wearing to make sure that, we preach about the relational nature of family engagement, making sure that we're embodying that as we are learning alongside our communities. Proximity matters. T just talked about it. I fundamentally believe that here. And that means listening to families and school staff to understand the conditions that are either making partnership possible and figuring out how we can invest to replicate that, or what's making it seem impossible, and where can we acknowledge those barriers and figure out how to solve for them. I think the second thing that I would just quickly add is, as I mentioned, we straddle the philanthropic world and the programmatic world. And so where are we using our programmatic work to be an incubator to test assumptions and take some of that weight off of a school system? I worked for DC Public Schools for 15 years. There's a lot of pressure that goes into that. Where as funders can we create an incubation space to try some things, to test some things, to get evidence, and then figure out how to scale those for other districts? And so those would be the only two additional things I would add to what T said.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and make a sense of a few things, and this is for everyone. And I'm not, so jump in as I ask this. So first of all, let me say something radical, and I'll repeat it. Families are not a problem to be solved. Like, that's crazy that I have to say that out loud, but let's say that out loud. And let's couple that with the idea that educators, by research findings, have lower levels of trust of parents than parents do of the educators. And I can't help but think it prompts me to look at the questions in the Q&A that where's the training in pre-service candidate programs all across this country to prepare educators and paraprofessionals and everyone who's in that school setting? How and where are we preparing folks to engage in family engagement in serious and real ways? It's a real void in our training system. So can you all help us make sense of this, particularly when we think about supporting the paid professionals who are extraordinary? They are extraordinary craftspeople, but we can't just assume that, like, well, of course you know how to do family engagement. There was a question.
And then Eyal, you should also chime in because this is your definite expertise. But we did a few years ago a pretty deep dive among schools of education to identify curriculum and other ways to see how emerging teachers were being prepared to engage with families. And it just isn't being done. It's just not being done. There are no incentives to do it. The system there's not an expectation for teachers to be able to engage with families in the ways in which we are talking about. So it is very much a skill that's having to be built post, like in the classroom, in practice. And so that is a big challenge. And that's a lot of the work that this group is focused on. And NAFSP, I should say, for folks who may or may not know VITO, the National Association of School and Community and Family Engagement. I don't know, it's a long acronym.
Close.
But they are actually building curriculum for pre-service teachers and working to get schools of education to adopt it. And there are lots of other, like ASU is doing a lot of micro-credentialing. So they're like little pockets, Digital Promise, trying to create opportunities for pre-service teachers to build this skill, because it is a skill. It is a skill, and it requires training. But there's also a lot of post pre-service, in-service training that's happening that I think this community can focus on to make sure teachers in the classroom today, especially new teachers, are getting access to the capacities they need, the expectations that they should be held to with the time and support needed. But I don't know, Eyal, you may want to speak to.
Sure. I mean, we are starting to. So NAFSP is a great resource on this. They've done a whole 50-state scan on pre-service and education and what state credentialing requirements look like from state to state. Nevada, for instance, is a leader. They require all of their pre-service teachers to go through a course on family engagement, but it is really pockets. And I think also, if anybody's been a first-year teacher, like, you step into that classroom and it's like, it kind of doesn't even matter what you were trained on in your pre-service. I mean, it does, of course. And like, you're holding on to those messages, but you're just drowning in your first couple of years. And I think I would even look at it a little bit more upfield. I tend to think that our schooling systems are very clearly not designed for comprehensive partnerships with families. In many cases, they're actually more designed to keep parents out. And so what that means is that we don't have teacher training programs, but even if you do train a teacher, this is why I would like to work with leaders, because when I work with teachers, they're saying, yes, could you please talk to my principal? So like the school principal is a pretty unreasonable set of demands on a school principal today. It's like, though, that's the one job I think that deserves all of our love and support and recognition. But even principals, they haven't necessarily been trained. They might not have a line of sight in what excellent work looks like. Do you think that their boss, the principal supervisor, is asking them how their family engagement strategies are supposed to affect their chronic absence problem? So we have like a whole set of system, like the schooling systems that teachers are sitting in do not have the systems in place to support them. And so what it really requires, this is part of what we see in our studies, that the pockets where we see excellence is like leaders who get it, leaders who make a commitment to it, leaders who create accountability structures, who put in place ways for educators to learn how to do this work. And the way to learn how to do this work, which in many cases is like a remediation of what hasn't been trained before, is to physically go into the community. This is what home visits are really helpful for, and other ways of like actually like listening and being in deep partnership with families in a way that is fundamentally different than what educators have experienced before, so that they can actually do some unlearning about what the experiences have been like, and so that they can start to create a new mental model about
Yeah.
what deep comprehensive partnership looks like and how it makes their job easier as a teacher.
Emily Morris.
I just want to jump in and echo what Al was saying about there being pockets, and Nevada being one, where as a state, Colorado being one where there's a lot of in-service. But we've also connected, and NAFSC is a critical part of our family engagement network, to other countries, because in Scotland, they do have pre-service, and in Australia, they do have pre-service. So how do we also learn across? That's part of the work that we're doing, is bringing colleagues together to study this across different education systems.
And Emily, having mentioned a place like Scotland or Australia, can you share with us a little bit of those global findings that might stir our imaginations for the bulk of this audience, the bulk of which is here in the United States?
Yeah, I think one of the important things that we've been learning, so we have a working group also that's looking at the connection of family engagement to student absenteeism and chronic absenteeism, led by our colleagues in Colombia, Brazil, Sierra Leone, and across US, and really understanding also how do we build solutions that help understand the core key and the root of the problem, but also how do we study different ways of approaching in these promising strategies. So for example, Scotland being a system where they do have families really involved in the pre-service education, and educators do get training on how to partner and collaborate with families. That's important for us to learn from, but also how do we study different solutions and promising practices and understand and compare and learn from each other across within the US and different schools and different states, but also within the global systems.
So there have been a number of questions about measurement, right? Because Emily Garcia, if we're trying to impact systems, those systems like accountability and measurement to some extent, right? So if you're not in Scotland, or maybe you're not in Illinois where there's a systemic program, what are the best possible ways to measure family engagement and also then make the case for the behavioral changes in the systems, or making the case for the funders who might be supporting the work of family engagement?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Greg. I think this is something that, in full transparency, we wrestle with when we go into conversations with schools and systems, because it's hard. We are impact focused, and there is something that is tangible about a quantitative metric. And I heard someone use this term that I heard once you say it 3 times, then it's yours. So I've said it twice now, so it's almost mine. But they use the term anecdata rather than anecdotal data. They sort of made their own. And to me, that demonstrates what we look at Flamboyant when we look to measure the impact of our investment. And we hear skepticism about qualitative data and how much can that really tell you, but not everything that matters, especially around something as relational as family engagement, can be captured through surface level numeric metrics. And participation counts or event attendance actually tell us very little about whether or not systems are changing. And so we have to dig a layer deeper. As we heard at the top of this call, the research and data is clear. And everyone on this call, I believe, fundamentally believes that family engagement is an academic strategy. And yet, all too often, it is not funded or resourced in the same way, because you don't have the same outcomes. You think about something like high impact tutoring, for example. You can really easily share output metrics from that, but it doesn't have the same long-term effect. And so for us, we pay attention to indicators like, how are educators changing how they communicate and partner with families? When we go into year-long or multi-year partnerships with schools, how are the conversations shifting in staff meetings? How are they talking about families? What are the words that they are using? So much of this work starts with a mindset shift. And Al talked about, it's about unlearning a lot of things that maybe have been reinforced both implicitly and explicitly. And so one is, how are educators changing how they're communicating? 2 is, are families reporting greater trust and agency and a better ability to monitor their child's progress, support their child's learning? I know Learning Heroes did this Go Beyond the Grades campaign, where families for the first time realized that they did not know what was happening in their child's education. And so, are we actually feeling and hearing families reporting that they actually understand what their role is, that they have trust in what the information that they're getting? And then finally, which is a big one for us, is family engagement being aligned and messaged with core academic priorities? All too often, we hear about family engagement as an add-on, or it's shoved in a communications shop in a school district. And so we really look for systems who are saying, yes, we believe in family engagement, and here's how family engagement shows up in our Office of Teaching and Learning. Here's how we've actually begin to assess for mindset in our talent and culture work. And so for us, that is really looking at both out externally, how are they messaging it, but then also internally in their communications, how are they changing that? Because for us, we believe that's the strongest signal of whether family partnerships is being normalized as a part of how the system operates versus we did this really great thing for a year and we've checked that box and now we'll keep it moving.
Ambika, I'd seen that you were going to jump in, and before I turn to you, everyone, there is a poll in which I hope everyone will participate as we continue this conversation. So please take advantage of the poll that has probably just popped up on your Zoom screen. Ambika.
Emily, when you were talking, I was like, oh, I'm agreeing with everything that you were saying. So I +1 to everything, but I would just say what we said in the beginning about the research, it's not new, shows us that there are academic and social emotional outcomes for students when families and schools partner. But a lot of us know that research, but we don't lead with, we say that, but we don't talk about some of that, those RCTs that have been done in the past. You actually can demonstrate the numbers there too. I think now that we don't really lead with family engagement as a strategy, I look back and when we've shared data or information with our board, we actually went by intervention and showed some of the outcomes. And you actually have data. You can show that when, Talking Points is one of our grantees, when parents and teachers communicate, have this technology platform where they can communicate in over 150 languages and can have that conversation. Over time, you can see students actually do better in math and ELA. So you do see academic outcomes and you can measure that. So I think what we need to do is sort of spend some time breaking down some of that data too. I know doesn't lead to systemic change, but the evidence base is there. And I think we need to, as a field, need to share that more. That would convince boards, whether it's foundation boards or policymakers, because the qualitative data and the quantitative data is there.
And T, there's a question here about support for parents and families and caregivers. There, in this stratosphere of this conversation, there's the family engagement that, among other things, is leading to academic outcomes. And there's also the support for parents and families, parent education, parent organizing. Can you talk about that body of work and how it also then supports your work as maybe it relates to literacy and some of the family engagement with schools and out-of-school time organizations? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Pardon me, everybody. I'm a little under the weather, so excuse the coughing. Yeah, absolutely. So as I shared before, some of the investments that we have in family engagement are on the parent and family side of this work. And it really focuses on, again, parent power. And this isn't about kind of filling parents and families with things that they don't already have, right? This is with recognition that, as we've been saying throughout this conversation, parents, caregivers, and family members are coming with their own power, their own expertise, their own cultural funds of knowledge that are important to their young person's education. And so those investments are really about what are the time and space and capacity that families need to really tap into the power that they already have. Because like we said on the teachers end, our teachers, our educators, our school leaders need that time, that space, that training and capacity. Our families need that support too. Just as our teachers, our educators, our school leaders have a lot on their plate, so do parents, caregivers, and families, and even the ones who want to be, involved at a higher level or at a different level, whatever the case may be, also need that time, that space, and that investment. And so this aspect of our work is really about what do families and caregivers need to really tap into their power and take on leadership roles in their child's school, in their community, in a really, really meaningful way. And sometimes how do we move out of the way so that parents and caregivers and families can really get in there and exercise that magic. We also know, like I said earlier, just like we said, parents trust and family members and caregivers trust teachers. Parents, family members, and caregivers also trust each other. And so when we get that parent leader out there with that message, it can be incredibly, incredibly powerful. And so what that looks like on the literacy end has been investing in ambassador programs. And so where parents are families and caregivers, you're going to hear me say parents, families, and caregivers. It's a lot to say in one, but I'm going to keep saying all three. Making sure that they have, training around early literacy, making sure they're really understanding. And then they can go out and kind of not only use that in their own home with their own child, but they're also multiplying that message because now they're serving as that trusted messenger and trusted advisor in the community. Some of that looks like investing in, pardon me, excuse me, thinking about local advocacy groups, both for teachers and for families, and investing in those. So organizations that specifically focus on uplifting the voices of families and the voices of educators, to making sure that when we're designing policy, that those voices are being not only considered but also kind of upheld and included in what decisions are being made. And I think when we have that investment on the family and caregiver end, and then we have that investment on the teacher and the school end, we're really able to kind of bring kind of our powers combined together into the space. And so again, I have appreciated something I've very much appreciated about this conversation is that we are looking at systems, we're looking at structures, and we're not kind of putting this responsibility purely on caregivers, families, and parents. And I do think if we want our parents to really tap into their magic, we also have to put training resources and things into them being able to kind of step into that power because they have it and it's important, and we need to make sure that we create space for them to tap into it. And so I think that still creates that balance and honors the responsibility of the education system to do their work and do their job around family engagement, but it also equips parents, families, and caregivers with the time, space, and resources to step into their own power and support their young person in a way that they are fully capable.
Thank you, T.
Hope that
And
answered
I'm
your
going to turn to you in a
question.
moment to help us. I want to use that idea of parent magic, family magic to bring this conversation to a close. But before I turn to you, Bibai, Emily and Eyal, I want, if I could turn to you as we bring this conversation to a close. And ideally, everyone's going to dig into the research that you all have done so brilliantly. You should, everyone. But is there something that we haven't raised that either you want to raise or something that you want to underline for us as this conversation comes to a close? Emily, I'll turn to you first, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to elevate a few things. One, what Emily said, that it's often the quantitative or the qualitative. It's the different ways that we study things. So we can use quantitative validated tools to study causality, but we also need the hows and the whys and listening to families and educators and students. And I want to elevate also the importance of students and family engagement and to T's point of elevating voice. So we've been creating these tools that schools can use to document, to understand, to study within schools this family engagement and how important it is to build these tools into their planning. So we're working with states and districts and countries to really create these tools so that schools can lead this research with families, with students. Also, just another thing is how important it is to study this longitudinally. We know family engagement is often stronger and the trust is stronger in the early years, but what are the strategies we need to study and keep this family engagement going over the life course of a young person's lives, and how do we connect those dots?
Thank you. Yeah.
I think that this question of measurement is like a really important frontier for our field in family engagement. I think all of us, as Ambika was sharing earlier, we know that when you invest in engagement, outcomes come. And I don't think anybody on this call needs to be convinced of that. That is more of like a lagging indicator. We know that down the line we'll see that. It seems to me that what the field really needs, what school people need, not even our family engagement leaders, but like our chief academic officers, our principal supervisors, our people who are not as ensconced in the day-to-day of family engagement, they could really use a tool that helps them really identify what are the practices that I should be seeing in schools. What are the key leading indicators that are known to advance outcomes. So it's not that I have to wait until the end of year results to see if the engagement actually led to something improving on absence or ELA or math proficiency, but what are the things that the schools could and should be doing that tell me that they're on the right track so that I'm not relying on attendance at back to school night, which can be helpful, but also not full in its evaluation. So that's why we're thinking about that. And I'm actually I would love to invite people that are on this call to stay in touch with us and tell us, like, what are you doing? How are you measuring? Because we really want to take a field level approach to making sure that this tool is developed in collaboration with the field.
Great. Panelists, I invite you to add to the chat. If you can answer the Q&As that remain. I want to know what family engagement programs do a great job informing parents about the science of learning as just one example. So selfishly, I'll call that one out. But there are lots of things there to be answered. Bib, you wake up every day thinking about this 24/7. You are a national leader as we think about family engagement. Where do we need to go? Where do you hope the philanthropic field as well as public funders will go forward in ways that America's families need?
Yeah, I keep coming back to school leaders, and we've talked a lot about it as sort of unlocking so much of the ecosystem. So to answer the question in the chat of how do we get our higher education system to build into the curriculum on the pre-service side, well, there's got to be demand for it. These school leaders have to be saying, I'm only going to hire teachers who have this skill, who have this capacity, who have this mindset. And so I think, again, as the whole system is being unbundled, reimagined, turned upside down with AI, school leaders have this, just as I think Eyal said, like an untenable job ahead of them. So having philanthropic world support school leaders and district leaders and having the vision and putting that infrastructure in place, putting that training in place, listening to families, honoring families, welcoming families, having all of that, I think is really critical. But the buck stops at the school. I mean, there's a lot that's happening in that school community, and it's up to the school leader to think about that school environment beyond the walls of the school. So the leader really holds the keys to a lot of what we're talking about here. So that's what we come back to as the locus of change in a supportive way to create the opportunities for families and students to thrive as we enter into a very brave new world of education.
Bib, many thanks to you. Many thanks to all of our panelists. I hope you all will take advantage of what we're still seeing in the chat and the Q&A. There is wisdom among all of the attendees, and I just love that you've been adding this brilliance. Sarah, you tasked us with too much brilliance, too little time, and I've gone through about 50 post-it notes. It's been a rich conversation, and I wish we could continue longer. Maybe we'll have to do this again.
Let's be clear that all of the brilliance on this panel, you have a little bit of responsibility to bear in bringing it together. So don't put that on me, Greg. No, seriously, thank you so much, Greg, for being such an incredible thought partner and pulling this together. Thank you to all of our incredible panelists for joining us today, for sharing, I mean, just the incredibly clear research that makes the case for this, but also inspiring advice and guidance about what it actually looks and feels like, that we're not trying to ask anything new from parents. We are actually trying to change the systems and the schools so that they are providing the space where we can tap into, as T says, I love that, like engaging the parent power that's already there, but just providing a space for them to really share their power with us. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining in as well. I hope that you gained a lot from this conversation, and also, just acknowledging all the insights and ideas and that you were adding in the chat as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. Just a reminder that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has released our new report, the Nation's Report Card, drawing on insights from the 9 sessions that we hosted last year as a part of our Decoding NAEP series. And now we're launching kind of a continuing conversation of using that report as a starting point, but want to hear your insights and thoughts about how we can continue to have this Nation's Report Card, this nationwide data resource, as a baseline to inspire action to continue student progress and narrow gaps. So check out the link on and the posts and conversation that we're hosting on LinkedIn. Sorry, I can't speak. And then I hope that you'll continue to join us for future conversations as a part of our Learning and Engagement Opportunities webinars. We've got a great session on high impact tutoring, looking at action in communities and some research behind kind of the implementation science around how that works. And we'll continue the conversation on tutoring next week as well. And then dig into the federal education tax credit and hear how states are kind of weighing their options in terms of that new policy that came out of HR 1 last year. I hope you'll join us for all of these upcoming sessions. And thank you again for joining us today.
Bye-bye, everyone.